Welcome to the Transfer Pricing Method, the podcast where we break down the complexities of transfer pricing with top industry leaders. I'm Adriaan van Heijden, and transfer pricing isn't just a profession for me, it's my passion. Today, I'm joined by two outstanding guests who bring unique perspectives to the conversation. First, we have Stevi Frooninckx. Stevi is the CEO and co-founder of Loctax, a VC-backed tech stack startup that offers a control center for global tax operations. Before, Steve worked in advisory, Big Four mainly, and the biggest part of his career, he was in-house at different multinationals, ranging from Fortune 500 players to privately owned companies. Stevie started his career in international and corporate tax, focusing on M&A and real estate, but evolved in a true jack of all trades, including TP responsibilities. Joining us as well is Maikel Verhoeven, Managing Director of Quantera Global, a leading transfer pricing consultancy firm based in the Netherlands. Maikel has been with Quantera Global since inception 2013, playing a key role in its growth and development before stepping into his current leadership role in 2022. Maikel also spent a year as interim TP in-house at ASML and is leading the operational transfer pricing team at Quantera Global. Known for his pragmatic and steady leadership style, Maikel combines operational excellence with a client-focused approach, ensuring Quantera Global remains at the forefront of transfer pricing services. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the value of data readiness and process excellence in and beyond the operational transfer pricing context. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just stepping into this space, this conversation is packed with valuable insights you won't want to miss. So let's start. Maikel, can you high level explain to the listeners what OTP is, operational transfer pricing, and how this is of relevant?
Sure. Thank you, Adriaan, and thank you for having me, and thank you also for the listeners for dialing in. So operational transfer pricing, or OTP, as with TP people call it, basically goes from the transfer pricing design up to your result in your local P&L. So when you have designed your transfer pricing policy, for example, you have a contract manufacturer or a limited risk distributor, you ultimately also want to show and get to the taxable result that aligns with that transfer pricing policy. So in basis, that's it. Sounds maybe quite simple, but it's something that often goes wrong. And yeah, even if you have the best transfer pricing documentation in the world or a great multilateral APA or whatever, if your operational transfer pricing is wrong, then you're basically, how to put it nicely, not so well off. And in that sense, it's actually the most critical element within transfer pricing. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Maikel. Stevie, can you explain the importance of proper and consistent data availability and appropriate stakeholder management and processes?
Yes, sure. And thanks for having me, first of all. I think so, based on what I experienced also in my in-house days, having your TP models blueprinted is the easiest, the fun part of it, but operationalizing it, what Maikel already said, is a very different game, is a very important part of it, but it's a very different game. Basically the same for all of your tax operations. Having the processes blueprinted is one thing, but operationalizing them, bringing them into the day-to-day is a very different one. What I mostly recall from my in-house days is that if you think a bit ahead of like what makes that operationalizing your transfer pricing is so difficult, is on the one hand that you have different stakeholders that you need to manage, typically like local finance people or local people that will need to help you to roll out the model, the policies, make it happen in the daily transactions. And their knowledge of TP is not the same as your knowledge of TP. So on a technical level, there are differences. So there is a very important role of processes already to make sure that all the stakeholders get connected, but also that in the processes that there is sufficient communication and context, which is shared with all of the stakeholders to ensure that everybody is on the same page and that also everybody understands the reasons why we are doing it. I think if you look at the other type of challenge, which I still see a lot and hear a lot about, is that the business you are operating in is changing all the time. It's very dynamic businesses. In this day and age, I think the amount of change has never been higher. And the problem also there is that if you want to operationalize your TP, if you want to bring it into the day-to-day, the problem is that you are a bit lagging behind, because often by the time that you have operationalized it, your business has already advanced or changed yet a bit further. And that makes it also challenging, which then again brings the spotlight on the processes and the importance thereof. I think in general, so stakeholder management, I explained, processes, why do we want to have them? Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you have standardization, that you have repeatability, but also that you can focus on governance and controls, and that you have end-to-end an audit trail, everything what happened. I still recall vividly, like the moments I had in my in-house days where you have calculations of specific, say, management fees, specific values that come out of it. But every now and then you deviate from those values, right? For good reasons, because they don't line up with what you expected it to be. And it's capturing all of that, those little deviations, capturing them in an audit trail to ensure that if 2 or 3 years down the road, questions come up from the tax authorities and that you can tackle them. That is what processes is about. Make sure that you have that audit trail captured. The data aspect then finally, we all know data we need for tax and for TP purposes comes from all angles, from all directions. So it can be financial, legal, business. It can be from treasury, whatever it is. It comes also in different types and formats. So you want to make sure that whatever you use in your OTP is checked on consistency, on quality. It's never perfect. That's reality. But be sure that you at least have a knowledge or an understanding of where it is very high quality versus where you just live with the fact that it is a bit suboptimal, but you can explain it. And I guess a very good example there is the availability of stat accounts, right? Stat numbers, which during the year are not available, but still ideally you have them available. So that is, I guess, a known issue for TP practitioners. I see Maikel already smiling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's indeed a typical one. And usually you have, the base data that you usually use in your OTP is basically usually on US GAAP or IFRS, and then it's good to know, like, are there goodwill push down or some other key differences with the local GAAP that you can take into account already during the year. And then after the year, then you can see, like, hey, are you going outside of the range on the local GAAP, or are you still sort of, is it a small difference? Because that's also, I think, what you also mentioned. It's never perfect, and then it can be decided also maybe dependent on your size of company. Yeah, whether you are sort of okay-ish with IFRS, US GAAP with some small adjustments, or that you actually also need to go to the local GAAP accounts. And it depends also on your data availability.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's quite a good introduction for you both. So thank you for that. Perhaps one question from my perspective. Operational transfer pricing 10 years ago, I don't think it really was a term that was used quite often. Can you perhaps share something on the history of it? It's obviously not something new, but it has become more important, right? So, Stevie, perhaps you can share your view.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, I was in house and the term was being used. I think what was different was let's say the level of engines available was different, or the level of tools to really automate it was different. But I do recall that we used it to bring the policies into practice. That was what OTP was about. So I guess there, I don't know, Maikel, whether you have anything to add there. Maybe you're better placed to say something about the history. But I'm familiar with the term already for a long time.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe also that, and that typically tax authorities are scrutinizing M&Es now more than 10 years ago, also more on details. And if your OTP isn't correct, and I think some M&Es found it out the hard way. Yeah, it's very difficult to defend yourself in an audit. So I think that's maybe the reason that it's sort of has become more a focus area for most M&Es.
Okay. Yeah, maybe perhaps to also move on to the next topic, Michael. Yeah, you have obviously been involved in numerous OTP projects, also from an advisory and coaching role. Can you tell us more on the benefits of a proper OTP process? I think you already mentioned one in the previous question, but perhaps you also see other benefits.
No, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I think it also depends a bit what type of company you are. So if you're a stock quoted company, then some other things may matter more to you than you are family owned, for example. So I think when you're stock quoted, then it's also quite critical that you have no surprises in your ETR, so in your effective tax rate. So when your OTP is very much in sync and in control, you have at least a lot less chance to that than when it's not. So I think that's one. Then also, if you are such a company, then typically you're also quite strict on your year-end closing process. You want to have that cycle as short as possible. Also with a client, before we stepped in, they basically took 2 weeks, put all the accountants in one room to make all the calculations for their intercompany invoices. So it delayed basically their year-end process with 2 weeks and also quite a lot of costs. And now we can do that within a couple of hours, just with some automated calculations and even also with more control inside. So I think it varies a bit in that sense to what your company profile is. But in general, I think, it can impact your ETR, it can impact your internal processes, how much time they take. And it can also get some potential savings on if you, for example, have custom duties or also your corporate income tax may be higher if you don't set the percentage or the calculations right. And I think a sort of side benefit, which is, I think, often not as put forward that much, is that when you have that data set in the right format, and also as Stevi pointed out, there are quite some developments with M&Es, and I think as a tax director or tax manager or in-house controller, whoever was responsible for that portfolio, you cannot always track everything. And then it's very helpful also that based on some automated triggers, you can automatically see, hey, there's an R&D function developing in this jurisdiction, for example. There are sales in this jurisdiction while there actually shouldn't be, or just to name a couple of simple examples.
Okay, thank you. Stevi, as true jack of all trades, do you have any other benefits you would like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I mean, I'm very nerdy about processes. I really love them. And so if there is one thing which I do want to stress is that you can only have automation if you first have a solid process in place. And very often that is overlooked. And people want to go do automation, which in OTP context is having an engine in place, and the engine will bring all the magic and everybody can just sit and relax and see in the dashboard all the beautiful stuff happening. But in reality, it all starts, obviously, we all know, with solid processes. That is why investing and doubling down on the process is so important. So in an OTP context, it's obviously making sure that you have your specific steps, your specific tasks, if you want, in an order that you connect with the different stakeholders. I already referred to the interplay between a central tax team and local finance, but obviously that can include as well, say, your external advisors, maybe other senior stakeholders that need to sign off, or as I refer to, like can be that HR, that legal, the business need to contribute in one way or another in the process so that you have all your stakeholders mapped out. And then basically the most important thing, again, another topic which I really, really like to stress here is the importance of having, governance, control, having the transparency in where you are in the process, that you can be proactive and anticipate on where you will see bottlenecks, risks, where things tend to go off the rails. And only if you have all of that in place, then automation will be the next step. And there is a lot of automation possible, but only if you do it in the right order. So that is why the process in itself is so important.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully agree, Stevie. So you cannot even automate it properly when you don't have the right setup in place first. So
it will result down the road in disappointment, in a waste of time and money. And I hear it on a daily basis that people try to cut corners. They want to go for the exciting stuff. Think about AI, think about next generation technologies. But all of them, if you don't have your processes properly mapped out, it will fail. So that is why it is so important to double down on it.
Okay. Thank you both. Perhaps also on the next topic, the key pitfalls. I think you already mentioned a few, but Stevi, perhaps you can tell our listeners more about the key pitfalls on this topic you have encountered in your career?
Yeah, sure. So I think on the one hand, there is that difficult balance between being precise and then being practical, because OTP is a lot about being practical, being able to bring it into the day-to-day, bring it to the business, because that's what we want. We don't want to roll out something which is not workable. So that balance is a very, I think, delicate one, and it's a pitfall, because I've done it myself, like firsthand experience. If you want to be too precise, it just won't work. And then again, at the end of the journey, you will need to go back to square one and go for more practical solutions. So that is an important one, I think. Then the rapidly changing business environment in which we operate. That's, let's say, I'm not sure to use the word sadly, but it's just the reality we are in. So be proactive there and be mindful that you do anticipate that change will be a fact of life, so that you can have a flexible solution which can consider the change. And then other than that, yeah, when it comes to the stakeholder management, I would say don't underestimate, but also don't overestimate the technical knowledge of the different stakeholders. So invest in communication, in context, and in the why. Explain them why we are doing it. Explain them what the consequences are if we are not doing it. But also, if you roll out new processes, new ways of working, be mindful of the change management and put yourself in their shoes, try to find like what's in it for them. Hopefully more efficient ways of working. Hopefully they can get rid of the manual data gathering and calculation of management fees or whatever it is, and try to bring them also value in terms of more efficient ways of working, a better life. And the last thing is maybe, I would call it the automation fallacy. I think that OTP engines can do automate quite a lot, at the same time, not 100%. So it will always be a 60, 70% automation, because transfer pricing, like all other tax domains, is not binary. It's always gray. And it's maybe the most gray area there is in tax. So that's also an important one to bear in mind. That's why we deviate from the values that come out of the engine and maybe go for another value, because it lines better up with the story one. So
Thank you, Maikel. I also saw you smiling on the remark of Stevi. Perhaps from a transfer pricing angle, can you share the key pitfalls of OTP?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, so I fully agree with Stevie. And also I think, there are some very simple things sometimes to help your colleagues. So I think when you don't have your OTP processes lined up, then probably you, for example, end up just before Christmas asking your colleagues for last minute support. So I think that's already a key benefit for them if they can just in a more relaxed manner know, like, hey, I can provide this data and I know already beforehand, so I can already prepare in advance instead of getting a request last minute. But from a transfer pricing angle, I think one of the pitfalls is that you first very theoretically, for example, design your transfer pricing policy, don't take any account of what data is available within the company, and then just design it as you theoretically would sort of perfect it, basically. And then going into your OTP and then finding out, oh, this actually doesn't work, or I can actually not make it happen, basically. So I think there is also a pitfall that you can, circumvent by so sort of considering OTP already a bit while designing your transfer pricing. I think, a bit in line actually with what Stevie said, if you go with a large inflexible solution, then it probably won't work. So maybe it works today, but then next week something happens in the business and it doesn't work anymore. So I think it should always be flexible. I think you can also build in already some flexibility in your TP policies, so that you also don't have to create a new storyline or like a defense file each time that some small changes occur. I think dependencies is also a thing. Of course, what Stevie said, you want to align with your stakeholders, but then it will always be a sort of, dependency on those stakeholders. So if you can come up with a solution that doesn't require your IT or finance support, or that you can, for example, basically just download the data yourself, put it into your calculations, and then come up with a sheet that in line with how to invoice, and then that your finance colleague can basically simply process it. I think that would be the sort of ideal, so that you don't have to rely on them too much. And then I think also, it's a bit obvious, but I think when you start, you should also start and know where you want to go, or what the end game is. And that's, I think an obvious one, but sometimes you also see that it sort of becomes very detailed, and then, maybe that's not the right route. And then also, of course, don't want to repeat Stevie each time, but he made very good comments. So that's why it's also from a TP angle a good pitfall, basically. Yeah, you have to document the why, and also the steps that you take appropriately in the guide. And I think Stevi mainly pointed out that it's for stakeholders, it's quite relevant. But I think also typically auditors ask for it. So when they come by and then they see that, hey, everything is in control. They see the right results in line with your policy, and they also see a proper process explanation and why it's guided like that. Then they also get way more comfort, and that process also takes less of your time and less time of the auditors, basically. Uh, so I
Makes
think
sense. Who is actually responsible for OTP and setting up all the mechanisms? Or perhaps not only OTP, but on a broader topic, Michael, who do you think should be in charge?
yeah, it's a good question. And it's also, I think, sometimes a debate with M&Es who is most responsible. So I think ultimately the TP person or tax person or at least the person responsible for tax is ultimately responsible. I think they should mainly be responsible though for the setup of the policy, making sure the policy still matches with the business and do a correct check basically on the invoices. And then I think some tax persons or transfer pricing persons are quite calculation or tech or Excel savvy basically, while others may be more legal minded. And then I think for those people it may be more difficult to also take care of the calculation part. And then it would be better make use of the capacities that you have. I guess that's, for example, a controller or someone in the organization who is capable of understanding the mechanism and making the calculations is mainly in charge for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Even if you have other thoughts.
No, I agree there. I think I would also make sure that you have an executive sponsor, the CFO typically, because like most of the tax operations and in particular when it comes more on the compliance side of things, it's a co-responsibility between tax and finance. So you cannot do this without finance, right? And that is, I guess, why it is important that you have an executive sponsor on board to ensure that things can get escalated if it doesn't work out. But other than that, agree with what Michael shared.
Great. Thank you both. Perhaps some closing remarks, Stevie. Can you give us some last remarks on what you also hear back from the community on this topic?
Yeah, sure. I guess it's a topic which is top of mind for many tech leaders. I guess the most proactive ones, they mind flexibility, scalability. They get started today. They don't overthink, but they get started. They experiment, they test, they see what works, rather than going for an old school waterfall approach where you develop it all and then it goes live. And when it gets commissioned, you can already decommission it again because it's outdated. I think what I also do here is that it's important to mind any spillover effects. Like I think Michael already referred to in the link between TP and then indirect taxes, VAT, customs maybe, but it can as well be withholding taxes, right? That you also be mindful there, like, okay, whatever we do, let's take a step back, let's zoom out and look at the global picture because there are always spillover effects. And these are important to have top of mind. And I think finally try to connect the dots. I guess the best tax leaders, they are great in connecting the dots and they think ahead. They think of tax as a kind of a life cycle where you have like business support projects. OTP is also there, like the day-to-day TP operationalization. But then obviously down the road, there is compliance, there is controversy, there are risks. And so make sure that you have them all connected, that if you identify risks, that you have them properly in your tax risk management policies or approach there, that controversy comes up, that you can very easily go back into the audit trails. So make sure that you also there connect the dots, because that will, in any case, bring you in a much better position. And there is no benefit of tackling this in an isolated manner, I think.
Okay. Michael, you have any final remarks?
Yeah, so I agree with Stevie. I think it's also good to think about what sort of side benefits you can indeed obtain from an OTP project. So also for your documentation, relevant data is then available typically, but also I think especially monitoring business developments, because typically if you want, it depends of course on your business model, but if you have, for example, basically you create segregated P&Ls within a legal entity, and then you can also allocate, for example, to various cost centers, etc. And then you can also see quite quite easily you can see some key developments. And typically, I think, not necessarily, ideally, you would of course be informed by the business on it. But it's good to have a sort of that additional check. And I think that's very helpful to also know where to zoom in, because you don't have time to zoom in on everything. So I think that's quite helpful. Mhm. And I think it can already start with an Excel and think about also which base data is sort of most relevant for you. So I think typically you want one sort of base data layer that you have, that you can leverage with or work with for the coming years. And based on that, you can then build some Excel initially to test the waters. Stevie pointed out, and then based on that Excel, you can then put it into a data or a software package. I think that's that's the most key.
Yeah, thank you both. Very interesting. Let me try to summarize our discussion, and please feel free to add anything you think is also important. I've heard that transfer pricing is one, but operationalizing it is a completely different game. So operational TP is very important. Processes are important. Obviously, also making them standardized and repeatable can also be an option. Audit trail is important as well, especially when you're on an audit 8 years later and you want to show what you have done. Benefits of OTP are, amongst others, no surprises to the ETR and in tax returns, potential savings, even alignment of stakeholders, and moving in the same direction. Some pitfalls are disbalance between precision and practicality, as discussed. Data that may not be fully reliable. You can never have the 100% approach. And a pitfall could be designing a very strict and detailed transfer pricing policy, which is very difficult to make it operational. And as final remark, I think the responsibility lies between tax and finance. And Stevie mentioned it's always good to have an executive sponsor on the board.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think maybe one last addition. I think also if you are, for example, a scale-up company, then now it may be still sort of manageable in a sort of limited way. But also, I think if you have your OTP process set up well, then also that makes the scalability of your business also much easier.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's an important one, because I wanted to add to that, like, be business friendly, because in the end, that's the role of your tax function, of your TP function, to support the business.
Yeah.
And the reference to a scale up is a very good example, where in the end, everybody wants to contribute to top line company success. Compliance is a key parameter to that, but make sure that you are business friendly, that you're not just a blocker, but you think ahead and that you want to support the business for growth and overall company success.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you, Stevie, Maikel, for contributing to this podcast. That's a wrap for today's episode of the Transfer Pricing Method. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and took away some practical strategies from our experts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support helps us bring in more expert guests and continue delivering high quality content. For even deeper insights into transfer pricing strategies, industry trends, and expert analysis, make sure to subscribe to Quantera Global's newsletter. Get the latest updates, exclusive content, and expert commentary delivered straight to your inbox. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Transfer Pricing Method.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.